I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it. It's time for a quick hit review. Or a vertical slice, if you will. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week on the chopping block. This week, and for the past couple weeks, I've been playing It Takes Two by Hazelight Studios and published by... EA. Charge for everything. Okay, I'm not getting hung up by that. In spite of it being published by EA, there's none of the hallmarks of their usual cartoon villain business practices in effect. No microtransactions, no unlockable cosmetics, just a complete experience that you pay for once and then own. In fact, it's worth noting that since this game absolutely mandates that you have to have a second player to complete the game, only one copy has to be owned if you want to play online with something, which is definitely nice. Yes, you heard correctly, this game is 2 players only, which seems to be the bread and butter of Hazelight Studios, whose only previous title was A Way Out, which me and my friend Canman played and thoroughly enjoyed up until we had to betray each other and he shot me in the face. It Takes Two, other than being the most appropriate title ever, is an action-adventure title that follows the saga of 2 parents that have drifted apart and decided to divorce with their young daughter caught in the middle. Their daughter then turns to the most rational course of action and uses witchcraft. In reality, she was just hoping to magically get the parents back together, and apparently the universe determined that this was the most effective means of doing so. Really? My phone picks now of all times to go off? Mom and Dad then wake up as dolls that cannot die and have to traverse their property in order to get back to their daughter's room to see how they can reverse their spell. They are, finger quotes, aided by the magic book that their daughter used to place the spell on them, who is the most irritating character that I have experienced in quite some time. I don't know if he was designed this way intentionally, but if so, it's worth noting that a character that is designed to be annoying is still annoying. It's worth noting that whenever this guy was on screen, it was one of the few moments in my life where I thought to myself that maybe a book burning wouldn't be so bad. And this isn't aided by the fact that his visual design is, for lack of a better term, creepy. Uncanny design aside, the book's main cutscene role is to reinforce a sense of collaboration which is ever present in the game's puzzles and action sequences. The 2 characters take slightly different roles and modifications to the gameplay that on their own might be marginally useful but together become enjoyable and hilarious, the latter for occasional griefing moments. And the environmental design is worth mention. As I said before, all the environments take place essentially in different areas of their estate, with building, environmental, and decorative elements being exaggerated and expanded to produce impressive set pieces and aesthetics to foster a more engaging platforming experience. On their own, most of the platforming challenges would be of middling difficulty. However, the injection of another human on the other side gives the feeling of accomplishment every time something is overcome, with the inevitable failure of some puzzles and platforming challenges being mitigated by the near instantaneous respawn system and lack of significant punishment. Some might argue that defangs any sense of peril, and I would say you're not wrong if not for the tone and intention of the game being more for cooperative fun. But while the gameplay leans towards enjoyment, the story holds a lot more emotional weight, as well as points of significant horror when you take them out of context. I speak with no exaggeration when I say that at the start of the story, the 2 parents are absolutely horrible people, and this is illustrated at a point about halfway through the campaign, which I'm about to spoil. To heavily paraphrase their rationale, they believe that their daughter's tears brought the curse upon them and that they need to be cried on and bathe in the shower of their daughter's tears in order to have it reversed. In order to make this happen, they determine that they have to destroy their daughter's favorite toy, which they eventually meet. The scene and gameplay that follows are some of the most genuinely uncomfortable moments that I've ever had to partake in because it mostly consists of dismembering and murdering her, all the while she's pleading with you to let her go and screaming in agony anytime you accidentally remove one of her appendages. And this isn't the only uncomfortable scene you'll come across. Throughout the story, there are boss fights and other moments that I would describe as a kind of body horror, like the first boss, where you defeat him by turning his own suction arms on himself and effectively causing him to gouge out his own eyes. But these scenes of horror and discomfort actually do a fairly decent job of mixing up the pacing from a narrative standpoint, which is good because the game is far longer than I initially anticipated. A Way Out initially racked up about 3 to 4 hours on my playthrough, and I was expecting something similar here, but the horrific elephant toy dismemberment scene was really only about the halfway point, and that was about 5 to 6 hours in. By the end of the game, we see both of the main characters undergo enough changes and make enough realizations that you genuinely hope that they get their shit together. Under other circumstances, you would think that this causes the game to start getting monotonous, but the variation doesn't simply extend to the narrative tone. Gameplay is constantly introducing new mechanics, tweaks, and even genres at times. While a majority of the title is third-person platforming, they introduce elements all throughout, like when it becomes a third-person shooter after you meet the squirrel militia, or the stretch where it becomes a dungeon crawler with magic and swords as you make your way through the Elephant Queen's castle. There are even minigames in each level to pause from the main campaign that you and your companion can use to blow off steam. And these were probably the most hilarious moments in our playthrough, with us often degrading to screaming and cursing at each other.
You son of a
followed by a round of laughter once a winner was determined, except when the games were introduced with the most bare bones of control instructions. One of the souring elements of the minigames comes from the fact that me and my friend get so competitive with each other, and these minigames kind of soured the mood overall whenever one of them was introduced, and we weren't able to grasp the controls properly, resulting in the record stating that one of us won or lost strictly on arbitrary decisions by the game.
How do you go so much faster than me?
Press X.
Oh, so that's how you won the last one, Peter.
This could have been solved with a simple implementation of a practice like in the Mario Party titles, just so we could get a feel on how to actually play before diving into competition. Nevertheless, on the majority of these minigames, we were able to have fun, at least while the play sessions were kept short, and now we get to the real meaty criticisms. While the game has plenty of variety, aesthetic appeal, and content, it's a bit on the side of too long, particularly in the last 2 hours or so. By this point, in spite of repeated attempts at continuing to vary, it's blown most of its novel ideas. While still visually charming and interesting to look at, the last few set-piece areas grow tedious. This became apparent in a few segments of the garden level that required us to engage in a third-person ranged combat, but me and my partner were continually blindsided by attacks from off our screens that we had no means of predicting. While the final levels do require some degree of presence from a narrative aspect, the gameplay was beginning to wear out its welcome. Lastly, for anyone intending on playing this game, I recommend playing for no longer than 1 or 2 hours at a time. In longer play sessions, the frustration had a tendency of building, with the other player being a potential source. It's not necessarily that the game is poorly designed in its co-op aspect. If anything, I'd have to say this is due to the fact that it relies so heavily on the co-op aspect that both parties, in wanting to perform well, become fairly focused, and in doing so have the slightest bit of fun drained while they're playing. Let's compare it to Hazelight Studios' other game, A Way Out. While that game was also a strictly co-op title, each player was usually able to do their own thing outside of set-piece moments. It Takes Two, by comparison, has each player being so heavily reliant on the other's actions that you begin to feel led by the nose and count on it so heavily that it becomes draining. This is merely speculation on my interpretation of the psychological aspects, though. In the end, the game is fun, charming, and well worth it if you're looking for a lighthearted play session with a friend. Just make sure you don't overindulge with an excessively long play session, be prepared for some surprisingly dark situations, and try not to get too competitive with the minigames.
Fluffy clouds, rays of light, organs. I guess we must be in heaven.